They thought she was broken. They thought she was forgotten. The Ambrose family invited Rachel back into their gilded world for one reason only: to parade her humiliation in front of high society as Thomas married a woman who embodied everything Rachel wasn't: old money, pedigree, and Natalia's approval. Natalia Ambrose, the calculating matriarch, had even arranged for Rachel to be seated in the overflow section near the caterer's entrance. A symbolic exile. But Natalia made one catastrophic miscalculation. She didn't know that Rachel wasn't coming alone. When the estate gates opened, Rachel didn't arrive broken and begging. She arrived in a convoy of luxury vehicles with 3 identical boys whose eyes were the exact piercing gray of the groom. And the secret she's guarded for 4 years is about to turn this picture-perfect wedding into a war zone. Chapter 1. The Invitation and the Ghosts. The envelope was heavy, cream-colored, embossed with gold leaf that caught the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Rachel Miller's Manhattan loft. She knew what it was before she opened it. The scent gave it away: jasmine. Natalia Ambrose's signature perfume. A smell that still triggered memories of cutting remarks delivered with a smile at charity galas, of being introduced as Thomas's little artist friend, even after they were married. Rachel stood in her gallery-like living space, surrounded by contemporary art worth more than most people's houses, and stared at the invitation. Mr. Thomas Ambrose and Miss Priscilla Hartwell request the honor of your presence. The wedding was in 2 weeks. Connecticut estate. Black tie. RSVP by Monday. Mommy, what's that? Rachel looked down. Dean, one of her 4-year-old triplets, was tugging at her linen pants. Behind him, Ryan and Chloe were building a fortress out of couch cushions, their dark auburn hair catching the light exactly the way Thomas is used to. Just some mail, baby, Rachel said, forcing her voice to stay light. Go play with your brothers. She walked to the kitchen island and dropped the invitation like it might bite. Her business partner and closest friend, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret, looked up from her tablet. Let me guess, Margaret said, eyeing the gold lettering. The Ambroses? Natalia, Rachel corrected, pouring herself water with hands that wanted to shake but didn't. She invited me to Thomas's wedding. It's in 2 weeks at the estate. Margaret's jaw tightened. Why would they? To gloat, Rachel said simply. Her voice had gone cold, the voice she used in boardroom negotiations. Natalia wants to show me what I missed out on. She wants to rub it in my face that Thomas is marrying Priscilla Hartwell, senator's daughter, old money, everything I wasn't. She walked to the window overlooking Manhattan. She thinks I'm still the struggling artist Thomas picked up at a gallery opening 5 years ago. She has no idea. Margaret knew the story. Everyone close to Rachel knew it. 5 years ago, Rachel had been a nobody, a talented painter trying to make rent by working 3 jobs. Thomas Ambrose had walked into her small gallery show, bought every piece, and asked her to dinner. It had been a whirlwind. 6 months of passion, art-filled dates, late nights talking about everything and nothing. Thomas had been different then, softer, more genuine. He'd proposed on a rooftop with the city lights behind him. But the moment they married, everything changed. Natalia Ambrose had made it her personal mission to destroy Rachel. It started subtly. Corrections at family dinners. It's fish fork first, dear, not salad fork. Comments about her wardrobe. How bohemian. We're having the ambassador over, so perhaps something more traditional? Then came the public humiliations. At a charity gala, Natalia introduced her to the governor as Thomas's phase. At the country club, she seated Rachel at a separate table from the family, with the hired help. And Thomas? Thomas said nothing. He would apologize in private, promise to talk to his mother, then do absolutely nothing when it mattered. The final blow came when Rachel found texts on Thomas's phone. Messages from Priscilla Hartwell. Nothing explicit yet, but the tone was unmistakable. They'd been reconnecting. When Rachel confronted him, Thomas folded like wet paper. Mother thinks we rushed into this, he'd said, unable to meet her eyes. She thinks we're too different. Maybe she's right. 3 weeks later, divorce papers arrived. The settlement was a joke. $50,000 and a non-disclosure agreement. Natalia had thrown the check at her feet during the signing. "Consider yourself lucky," Natalia had hissed. "Most gold diggers don't even get carriage fare." Rachel had taken the check and left. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She disappeared. What the Ambroses didn't know was that Rachel had discovered she was pregnant 2 days after signing those papers. Triplets. For 3 sleepless nights, she debated telling Thomas. But every scenario ended the same way. Natalia would either force her into a custody battle that would drain her dry, or worse, take the children and raise them to be carbon copies of their grandmother. So Rachel had made a choice. She ran. She moved to Manhattan, used the $50,000 to rent a tiny studio, and worked through her entire pregnancy building what would become Miller Contemporary, an art gallery and consulting firm. The first year had been hell. 3 newborns. No sleep. Working from a laptop balanced on a changing table. But then came the breakthrough, a viral marketing campaign for a tech startup that exploded. Then another client. Then a merger. Now, for years later, Rachel wasn't just surviving. Miller Contemporary represented some of the world's most influential contemporary artists. Her client list included Fortune 500 companies. Her net worth had just crossed $40 million. She was the CEO, the sole decision-maker, and she answered to no one. But the Ambroses didn't know any of that. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. The text made her blood run cold. "Hope you received the invite. Mother thought you could use a reminder of what you lost. Dress appropriately if you can afford it. T." Rachel stared at the message. It wasn't Thomas. Thomas was weak, but he wasn't cruel. That text had Natalia written all over it. "They think I'm starving," Rachel whispered. Margaret watched her boss's expression shift. She'd seen that look before, right before Rachel closed a 7-figure deal. "Rachel, what are you thinking?" Rachel picked up the invitation again. She ran her finger over the embossed date. "They want a show," Rachel said quietly. "They invited the ex-wife to humiliate her, to seat her in the back and laugh. Natalia wants to prove she won." She turned and looked at the boys, who were now arguing over who got to be the dragon in their imaginary game. 3 beautiful, healthy heirs to the Ambrose name, kept secret for 4 long years. "Margaret," Rachel said, her voice dropping to a razor's edge. "Clear my schedule for 2 weeks from Saturday. And call the stylist. I need a dress." "Not just a dress?" Rachel's smile was arctic. "I need a weapon made of silk." "And Margaret? Call the tailor too. Get measurements for the boys." Margaret's eyes widened. "You're bringing them?" "If Natalia wants a family reunion," Rachel said, watching her sons play, "I think it's time she met her grandsons." Chapter 2. Preparation for Battle. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in strategic planning. Rachel didn't just prepare for a wedding. She prepared for war. First came intelligence gathering. Margaret's team worked overtime, digging into the Ambrose family finances. What they found was gold. "They're broke," Margaret said, spreading documents across Rachel's desk. "Not struggling broke. Drowning broke. The family trust has been hemorrhaging money for 3 years. Bad investments in oil, a failed real estate venture in Dubai, and Natalia's shopping addiction." "How broke?" Rachel asked. "They took out a second mortgage on the Connecticut estate to pay for this wedding. The wedding budget is $1.2 million. Money they don't have." Rachel leaned back in her chair. "They're betting everything on this marriage. Priscilla's family is loaded. Senator Hartwell is worth about $200 million. This isn't just a wedding, it's a financial merger." "Even better," Rachel murmured. "When it falls apart, they lose everything." Next came the wardrobe. Rachel visited her stylist, a woman who dressed Oscar winners and world leaders. "I need to look like I could buy everyone in the room," Rachel said. "I need to walk in and make every woman jealous and every man regret their choices." The stylist's eyes lit up. "I have exactly the thing." She emerged with a midnight blue Alexander McQueen gown. Backless. A subtle cathedral train. Hand-beaded with crystals that caught light like stars. The neckline was elegant but commanding. The silhouette was pure power. "It's perfect," Rachel breathed. Shoes. Manolo Blahnik. The blood-red soles. Jewelry? Diamond studs. Nothing else. I want them looking at me, not my accessories. The boys' outfits required equal precision. Rachel hired a tailor who'd made suits for child actors at the Met Gala. I need them to look like princes, she told him. Custom. 3 identical suits, but different colors so people can tell them apart. The tailor measured each boy carefully. Dean in charcoal gray. Ryan in navy. Chloe in deep burgundy. Miniature Tom Ford cuts with silk pocket squares. When the boys tried them on, even Margaret teared up. They look like they own the world, she whispered. They will, Rachel said. The coaching sessions were harder. 4-year-olds weren't exactly known for sitting still, but Rachel knew her sons. She made it a game. We're going to a big party, she told them one evening, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor. There will be lots of people, and we need to use our best manners. Why? Ryan asked, ever the skeptic. Because Mommy needs you to help her with something important. What? Dean wanted to know. They knew they had a father. Rachel had never lied about that. But they'd never met him. She told them their daddy lived far away, and that things were complicated. Is he nice? Chloe asked quietly. I don't know anymore, Rachel admitted. But I need you to be brave. Can you do that for Mommy? All 3 nodded solemnly. Rules, Rachel said. Be polite. Say please and thank you. Don't run unless Mommy says it's okay. And stick together, always. What if someone asks who we are? Dean asked. Rachel smiled. Tell them your names. And if they ask why you're there, you say, Mommy brought us to see a wedding. They practiced. Over and over. By the end of the week, the boys could shake hands, make eye contact, and introduce themselves like miniature diplomats. Then came the transportation. 3 black Audi Q8s, Rachel told her security coordinator. I want them identical. Tinted windows. And I want drivers who've worked executive protection. You expecting trouble? I'm expecting a statement. The night before the wedding, Rachel couldn't sleep. She stood in her bathroom, looking at herself in the mirror. Tomorrow, she would walk back into the world that had chewed her up and spit her out. But she wouldn't be the same woman. She'd be better, richer, stronger. And she'd have 3 perfect weapons named Dean, Ryan, and Chloe. Her phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. Mother seated you in overflow. You'll be comfortable near the service entrance. Try not to embarrass yourself. T. Rachel didn't respond. She simply screenshotted the message, saved it to a folder labeled Evidence, and smiled. See you tomorrow, Natalia, she whispered. Chapter 3. The Ambrose Estate. Natalia's Perspective, 4 to 5:15. The Ambrose Estate in Connecticut was exactly what you'd expect from old money desperately clinging to relevance. Sprawling, ostentatious, and cold. The main house was a Georgian colonial with white columns and 30 rooms that nobody used. The gardens stretched for acres, manicured within an inch of their lives by a staff of 12. For the wedding, a massive white tent had been erected near the cliffs overlooking Long Island Sound. Inside, crystal chandeliers, imported white roses, gold-rimmed china for 300 guests. It was a production designed to project wealth. The irony was that the family was drowning in debt to pay for it. Natalia Ambrose stood in the main house's bridal suite, adjusting her diamond necklace in a full-length mirror. She was 63, but surgery and fillers had frozen her face at an eerie 50. Her eyes, however, were sharp. Predatory. Is she here yet? Natalia asked without turning around. Thomas stood by the window in his tuxedo, a glass of scotch in his hand, even though it was only 2 in the afternoon. His hand trembled slightly. I don't know, Mother, he said quietly. I still think inviting her was a mistake. Natalia spun around, her expression icy. It's not a mistake, Thomas. It's closure. And it's a reminder. She walked toward him, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Priscilla is perfect, Natalia continued. She comes from the right family. She has the right connections. The senator's support will open doors we've needed open for years. Sarah was She waved her hand dismissively. A stain on our history. A lapse in judgment. I loved her, Thomas said, so quietly he almost didn't say it at all. Natalia's expression hardened. You loved the idea of rebellion. You loved playing artist with a woman who painted for pennies. I corrected that mistake. Thomas took a long drink of scotch. He looked out at the arriving guests, Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, town cars disgorging senators, tech moguls, society matriarchs. She hasn't responded to the text, he muttered. She'll come, Natalia said with absolute confidence. People like her never turn down an open bar and a chance to rub elbows with their betters. I seated her at table 19, by the kitchen doors, next to the bathroom. That's cruel, Mother. That's appropriate, Natalia corrected. She needs to see what real class looks like. She needs to understand the chasm between where she is and where we are. What Natalia didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the chasm had reversed. A knock at the door interrupted them. Come in, Natalia called. Priscilla Hartwell entered, radiant in her pre-wedding glow. She wore a silk robe over her undergarments, her hair already done in an elaborate updo. She was 28, blonde, with the kind of effortless beauty that came from good genetics and better skincare. How are we doing? Priscilla asked, smiling at Thomas. Perfect, darling, Natalia answered before Thomas could speak. Everything is perfect. Priscilla walked to Thomas and kissed his cheek. You seem tense. Just nervous, Thomas lied. Rachel chose her words carefully. We're going to meet your father. 3 pairs of gray eyes widened. It's a big day, Priscilla said, squeezing his hand. But we're going to be so happy. Thomas forced a smile. He loved Priscilla. Or, at least, he thought he did. She was beautiful, accomplished, safe. She didn't challenge him. She didn't make him feel things that were inconvenient. She wasn't Rachel. I should finish getting ready, Priscilla said. Mother is having a meltdown about the flower arrangements. After she left, Natalia turned back to Thomas. You see, she said, that's what a proper wife looks like. Graceful. Appropriate. Not some starving artist who wore thrift store dresses to the opera. Thomas said nothing. He just poured himself another scotch. Outside, the wedding coordinator was barking into her headset. No, the string quartet goes on the left side of the aisle. The left. Do I need to draw you a diagram? Guests were mingling on the lawn, champagne glasses in hand. A who's who of Connecticut and New York society, politicians, old money families, tech billionaires who'd married into aristocracy. Everyone was playing their part in the theater of wealth. But something was about to go very, very wrong. At the security gate a mile down the driveway, a guard named Marcus was reviewing his clipboard. He'd been hired for the day, $12 an hour to check names and direct traffic. When the first black Audi Q8 pulled up, Marcus didn't think much of it. When the second one appeared behind it, he started paying attention. When the third rolled into view, all 3 vehicles identical with blacked-out windows, he realized this wasn't a typical wedding guest. The lead car stopped at the checkpoint. Marcus leaned down to the driver's window. Name, please? The driver, a man in a black suit who looked like he moonlighted as a Secret Service agent, didn't smile. Rachel Miller, he said. She's on the list. Marcus scanned his clipboard. He frowned. I have a Rachel Miller, but she's assigned to overflow parking. Lot B, shuttle bus to the main house. There was a pause. Then the rear window of the Audi rolled down. A woman appeared. Sunglasses. Diamond earrings catching the sunlight. An aura of power that made Marcus instinctively straighten his posture. Open the gate, Rachel said. It wasn't a request. It was a command delivered with the kind of authority that made you obey before your brain caught up. Marcus stammered. Ma'am, I have you listed for. I heard what you have me listed for. Rachel interrupted, her voice soft but cutting. Open the gate. Now. Something about her presence, the vehicles, the security detail, the sheer confidence, made Marcus decide this was above his pay grade. He hit the button. The gate swung open. As the convoy rolled through, Marcus watched them disappear up the tree-lined driveway toward the main house. He had a sinking feeling that whoever this woman was, She was about to ruin somebody's day. He was right. Chapter 4. The Arrival, Power in Motion. The 3 Audi Q8s moved up the driveway like a presidential motorcade. Inside the lead vehicle, Rachel sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. The midnight blue McQueen gown pooled around her feet. Her hair was swept into a sleek chignon. Diamond studs, 2 carats each, caught the afternoon light. She looked like she could buy everything in sight. Because she could. Behind her, in their respective car seats, the boys were remarkably calm. Dean was reading a picture book. Ryan was looking out the window, fascinated by the massive estate. Chloe was quietly singing a song from his favorite cartoon. "Remember what we practiced?" Rachel asked, glancing back at them. "Be polite," Dean recited. "Don't run," Ryan added. "Stick together," Chloe finished. "Good boys." The convoy emerged from the tree line, and the main house came into view. The circular driveway was already crowded with luxury vehicles, Bentleys, a Rolls-Royce Phantom, several Mercedes S-Classes. But the Audis didn't stop at the valet area. They drove straight to the front entrance, a spot clearly marked with cones and a sign that read, "Bridal Party Only." The wedding coordinator, a stressed woman in her 40s with a headset and a clipboard, was standing near the entrance directing staff. When she saw the Audis approaching, her eyes widened. The cars didn't slow down. They parked in formation, right in front of the main doors. The coordinator sprinted over, waving her arms. Excuse me, you can't park here. This area is reserved for." The driver of the lead car ignored her completely. He stepped out, adjusted his jacket, and walked calmly to the rear door. He opened it. The coordinator's protest died in her throat. The first thing to emerge was a pair of Manolo Blahnik heels, midnight blue with blood-red soles. Then a length of Alexander McQueen silk. Then Rachel Miller stood up. She rose to her full height, 5'9" in heels, and smoothed the gown. The fabric clung to her curves like it had been painted on. The backless design showed smooth, toned skin. The train whispered against the gravel. She looked like a movie star. No, she looked like a woman who owned movie stars. On the lawn, where about 50 guests were mingling during the pre-ceremony cocktail hour, heads began to turn. "Who is that?" someone whispered. "Is she one of Priscilla's friends?" "That's a custom McQueen. I tried to get an appointment with that designer and couldn't even get a call back." Natalia Ambrose, who had just stepped onto the terrace with a champagne flute, squinted against the afternoon sun. She didn't recognize the woman at first. The Rachel she remembered was plain. Thrift store florals. Minimal makeup. Mousy brown hair usually pulled into a messy bun. This woman was a goddess carved from ice and vengeance. Then Rachel removed her sunglasses. Their eyes met across the lawn. Natalia's champagne flute froze halfway to her lips. But the real shock was still coming. Rachel turned back to the Audi and extended her hand toward the interior. "Come on, boys," she said clearly. One by one they emerged. Dean first. Charcoal suit, perfectly tailored. He blinked in the sunlight and took his mother's hand. Then Ryan. Navy suit. He looked around with wide-eyed curiosity. Finally, Chloe. Burgundy suit. He clutched a small stuffed dinosaur and stayed close to his brothers. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Because there was no mistaking it. The boys were identical. Dark auburn hair, perfectly styled. The same sharp jawline. The same aristocratic nose. And when they looked up, scanning the crowd with identical expressions of polite curiosity, 3 pairs of piercing gray eyes, the exact, unmistakable shade of Thomas Ambrose, stared back at 200 witnesses. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "Are those? They look exactly like." "That's impossible." On the terrace, Natalia's champagne glass slipped from her fingers. It shattered on the stone, the sound of breaking crystal echoing in the sudden, terrible silence. Thomas appeared behind his mother, drawn by the commotion. He grabbed the terrace railing to steady himself. His face drained of all color. He looked at the boys. Then at Rachel. Then back at the boys. The math wasn't complicated. For years since the divorce, the boys looked about 4 years old, which meant, "No," Thomas whispered. "No, that's not."
But it was.
Rachel adjusted Chloe's bow tie with maternal efficiency. Then she looked up toward the terrace. She locked eyes with Natalia. She didn't smile, didn't wave, didn't gloat. She just stared with a cool, calm intensity that sent a shiver down Natalia's spine. Then Rachel took the hands of her sons, Dean and Ryan on her right, Chloe on her left, and began walking toward the ceremony seating area. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. No one spoke. They just stared. Some pulled out phones. Others grabbed their partner's arms. A few simply stood frozen, mouths open. "Mommy," Dean said loudly, his voice carrying in the silence. "Is that the daddy you told us about? The one on the balcony?" Every eye turned to Thomas. Rachel kept walking, her voice gentle but audible. "We're just here to watch a show, baby. Keep walking." She didn't head for the overflow seating near the kitchen. She walked straight toward the front row, the section with silk ribbons and a sign that read, "Family of the Groom." An usher, a young man in his 20s who'd been hired to direct guests, stepped nervously into her path. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "This section is reserved for immediate family only." Rachel stopped. She didn't look angry. She looked amused. She glanced down at the 3 boys standing beside her, each one a miniature copy of the man currently hyperventilating on the terrace. "I think you'll find," Rachel said, her voice smooth as velvet but sharp as a razor, "that there is no one here more immediate than his sons." The usher's face went pale. He looked at the boys. Then at Rachel. Then toward the terrace where Natalia stood frozen. He stepped aside. Rachel walked to the front row and sat down in the center seat. The boys settled on either side of her, swinging their legs, looking around with innocent curiosity. And just like that, before the wedding march had even started, the carefully constructed world of the Ambrose family began to crumble. Chapter 5. The Revelation. The boys emerge. The atmosphere in the front row was apocalyptic. Rachel sat calmly, hands folded in her lap, while nuclear fallout swirled around her. The other guests in the first few rows, senators, old money socialites, tech moguls, were pretending to study their programs, but every ear was tuned to the unfolding disaster. Natalia Ambrose did not run. Natalia Ambrose never ran. But she moved down from the terrace with the speed and purpose of a missile launch, her heels clicking sharply on the stone pathway. Her face was a mask of rage barely contained beneath layers of expensive makeup and Botox. She reached the end of the aisle where Rachel sat like an emerald queen on a throne, flanked by 3 perfect princes. "What is the meaning of this?" Natalia hissed, leaning in. She smelled of champagne and desperation. Rachel didn't uncross her legs. She smoothed the lapel of Ryan's navy jacket with maternal precision. "Hello, Natalia," she said pleasantly. "You look tense." "New surgeon." Natalia flushed a deep, ugly red. "Get out.
Now."
"Take these children, and leave before I have security drag you out." "I wouldn't do that," Rachel said, finally looking up. Her eyes were ice. "You sent the invitation. I have the RSVP confirmation right here on my phone. And as for having security drag us out, do you really want a scene?" She gestured subtly around them. Senator Hartwell was watching from 3 rows back, frowning. Judge Morrison, a family friend, had her phone out, clearly recording. A tech billionaire Rachel had once consulted for was watching with open fascination. "Look around, Natalia," Rachel continued softly. "If your security touches a single hair on my head or on my children, I'll sue you for assault in front of half of Connecticut's elite. And unlike 4 years ago, I have the money to win now. Would you like me to call my lawyer? He's on retainer. Very expensive. Very good." Natalia faltered. She'd built her entire life on appearances, and Rachel had just threatened to detonate that foundation in public. "Who are they?" Natalia whispered, her gaze flickering to the boys. She couldn't help it. The resemblance was physically assaulting her senses. "They're my dates," Rachel said simply. Before Natalia could respond, Thomas arrived. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. His tuxedo was perfect, his hair was styled, but his face was gray and his hands were shaking. He stopped 3 feet away, his eyes locked on the triplets. Chloe, the boldest despite being the quietest, looked up at Thomas. He tilted his head, a gesture that was painfully, unmistakably identical to Thomas's own mannerism. "Mommy," Chloe said, tugging Rachel's hand. "He looks like me." Thomas flinched like he'd been shot. "Rachel," he croaked. His voice sounded like he'd swallowed gravel. "Rachel, tell me, are they?" "Are they what, Thomas?" Rachel challenged, her voice rising just enough for the first 3 rows to hear clearly. "Are they the children you didn't want?" "No, that's not right. You didn't know about them because you were too busy moving Priscilla into our bed before the divorce ink dried." "Wait, what?" A woman in the second row stage whispered. They were having an affair? The carefully constructed narrative that Thomas and Priscilla had met after the divorce began to crumble. "I didn't know," Thomas stammered, looking at Dean, then Ryan, then Chloe. He saw his own chin, his own eyebrows, his own expressions reflected in triplicate. Tears welled in his eyes. How old are they?" "4," Rachel said crisply. "They turned 4 last week. Does the math work for you, Thomas? Or do you need a calculator?" "This is a trick," Natalia interjected, stepping between Thomas and the boys like a human shield. She grabbed Thomas's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his tuxedo sleeve. "Don't be a fool, Thomas. She hired them. She went to a casting agency and found lookalikes. She's trying to ruin your day because she's jealous and vindictive." "Grandma is scary," Ryan whispered loudly to Dean. Several people in the crowd tittered. Natalia whipped her head around to glare at the child, but stopped mid-turn. Ryan was frowning, a specific, brooding frown that Natalia had seen on her own late husband's face for 40 years. A genetic marker as distinctive as a fingerprint. "We're starting this wedding," Natalia snapped, realizing she was losing control. Thomas, get to the altar. The music is about to start." She turned to Rachel, lowering her voice to a venomous whisper. "If you make one single sound, during the ceremony, I will destroy you. I will take you to court. I will expose you as a fraud. I will." "You'll do what, exactly?" Rachel interrupted, her voice deadly calm. "Sue me? Please do. I'll counter-sue for emotional distress, parental alienation, and we can let a judge decide who has more credibility, the self-made CEO or the socialite who's mortgaged her estate to pay for a wedding." Natalia's eyes widened fractionally. "How did she? Did you think I wouldn't do my homework?" Rachel smiled, and it was terrifying. "I know everything, Natalia. Everything." The organ music swelled. The opening notes of the wedding march began. Natalia practically shoved Thomas toward the altar. He stumbled, looking back over his shoulder at the boys until he nearly tripped over a flower arrangement. He took his place at the altar, but he wasn't looking down the aisle waiting for his bride. He was staring at the front row, at 3 boys who had his eyes. Chapter 6: The Confrontation. Wedding unravels. The massive doors to the estate opened. Priscilla Hartwell stepped out, and under normal circumstances, this would have been the moment every eye turned to admire her. She was wearing a Vera Wang masterpiece, custom lace and tulle with a cathedral train that seemed to go on forever. She held a bouquet of white orchids. Her father, Senator Hartwell, a large, imposing man with silver hair, offered her his arm with visible pride. They began the long walk down the white-carpeted aisle. But something was wrong. Usually at a wedding, guests turn toward the bride. They smile. They cry happy tears. They whisper about how beautiful she looks. Today, half the guests were still craning their necks toward the front row. They were staring at the woman in the midnight blue gown and the 3 little boys who looked exactly like the groom. Priscilla kept her smile plastered on. She'd been trained since childhood to maintain composure, but her eyes darted sideways. Who is that woman? Why is everyone looking at her? She reached the altar. Thomas took her hand, but his palm was slick with sweat. He was trembling visibly. "Are you okay?" Priscilla whispered through her perfect smile as the priest began the opening prayer. "Yeah," Thomas breathed, though he looked like he might vomit. The priest, an elderly bishop who'd known the Ambrose family for decades, began his traditional preamble about the sanctity of marriage, the bonds of loyalty, the blessing of family. The words rang hollow in the charged silence. Guests shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. Phones were surreptitiously pulled out. Then came the moment before the vows, that sacred silence where the only sound should be the ocean waves crashing against the cliffs below. "I'm hungry," Dean announced. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't even particularly loud. It was just the clear, matter-of-fact statement of a 4-year-old in a silent room. But in that silence, it sounded like a gunshot. "Sure," Rachel said gently, reaching into her clutch. She pulled out a small pack of crackers and handed one to Dean. The cellophane wrapper crinkled. The sound echoed like thunder. Natalia, sitting in the mother of the groom seat directly across the aisle, looked ready to spontaneously combust. She signaled sharply to a security guard standing in the shadows near the tent entrance. She made a cutting motion across her throat. "Get them out." The guard, a broad-shouldered man in a dark suit, began moving toward Rachel's row. Rachel saw him coming in her peripheral vision. She didn't flinch, didn't panic. She simply stood up. The movement caused the entire congregation to gasp. They thought she was objecting to the wedding. "Sit down," Natalia hissed, forgetting to whisper. Rachel ignored her completely. She looked at the approaching security guard, raised one hand, palm out, in a gesture that clearly said stop. Then she turned and looked directly at Thomas. "Thomas," Rachel said. She didn't shout, but her voice carried with perfect clarity across the stunned silence. Every ear in the tent was tuned to her frequency. "Your mother is sending a guard to remove your sons. Is that how you want to start your marriage? By kicking your own flesh and blood out into the street again?" The priest stopped speaking mid-sentence. Priscilla dropped Thomas's hand like it had burned her. "Sons," Priscilla repeated, her voice climbing an octave. She turned to Thomas, the veil trembling. "Thomas, what is she talking about?" "It's a lie," Natalia shrieked, jumping to her feet. "She's a liar. Security, remove her." "It's not a lie." The deep voice boomed from the back of the wedding tent. Everyone turned. Walking down the center aisle was a man in his late 60s with silver hair and a stern, scholarly face. He wore an expensive suit and carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who'd spent his life in academia. "Uncle Ambrose," Thomas whispered. Dr. Marcus Ambrose, Thomas's uncle, a renowned geneticist and the black sheep of the family who'd been estranged from Natalia for over a decade, walked steadily toward the front. He stopped at the end of Rachel's row and looked at the triplets with the cool, analytical gaze of a scientist. "I saw them in the parking area," Dr. Ambrose said, addressing the crowd. "I was curious about the disruption, so I came to see for myself." He pointed at the boys. "Heterochromia iridum, partial sector variant. It's a rare genetic trait. I've published 3 papers on it." Rachel understood what he was doing. She touched Dean's face gently. "Show them, baby," she said softly. Dean blinked up at the crowd. In the bright afternoon light streaming through the tent, it was visible. His left eye was piercing gray, but there was a distinct golden sector in the lower iris, like a slice of amber embedded in storm clouds. Dr. Ambrose nodded. "Thomas has it. My father had it. I have it in my right eye. It's an autosomal dominant trait specific to the Ambrose bloodline. The genetic probability of finding 3 unrelated children with this exact trait is approximately 1 in 18 million. He turned to face Natalia directly. "Unless this woman somehow managed to find 3 child actors who all happen to have the rare Ambrose genetic marker, these are your grandsons, Natalia. Biologically, indisputably, your grandsons." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the grass outside the tent. Priscilla took a step back from Thomas. Then another. She looked at his eyes, the eyes she'd found so striking when they first met, and then looked at the boy's eyes. The golden sector. It was there. In all of them. You have children, Priscilla whispered. You have triplets. And you didn't tell me. I didn't know, Thomas cried, his voice breaking. His carefully maintained composure was shattering in real time. She left. She disappeared. She never told me. Because your mother threatened to destroy me if I didn't leave, Rachel cut in, her voice ringing with authority. Because she told me I was trash. Because she told me you never loved me, that I was a mistake you needed to be saved from. She looked at Natalia with contempt. I was pregnant, Thomas. I was terrified. And I knew, that if Natalia found out, she would either take them and raise them to be just like her, cold, cruel, and calculating, or she'd drag me through court until I had nothing left. So, I made a choice. I saved them. She gestured to the boys, who were happily munching crackers, completely oblivious to the fact that they'd just dismantled a dynasty. I didn't come here to stop the wedding, Rachel said, lying smoothly. I came because Natalia insisted on sending me an invitation. She wanted to show off. She wanted to humiliate me. She smiled coldly. Well, Natalia, consider the show started. Senator Hartwell, Priscilla's father, had been sitting in shocked silence in the second row. Now he stood up, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. He was a large man, 6'3", former college linebacker, and when he was angry, people noticed. He walked to the altar with heavy footsteps that thudded against the temporary flooring. He grabbed Thomas by the lapels of his tuxedo and shoved him backward. You bring shame to my daughter, the senator roared. You have a secret family. Illegitimate children. They're not illegitimate, Rachel corrected calmly, standing. They were conceived in wedlock. They are the legitimate heirs to the Ambrose estate, and legally, they're entitled to quite a lot. She paused, letting that sink in. Trust funds. Inheritance. Their names on legal documents. Everything Thomas would have inherited, his sons have a legal claim to it now. Natalia let out a strangled sound and collapsed back into her chair, clutching her chest dramatically. But no one rushed to help her. They were too busy watching the spectacular implosion. Priscilla looked at Thomas, then at Rachel, then at the three boys, who represented a permanent tie between Thomas and his ex-wife, a tie that would last forever. I can't do this, Priscilla said. Her voice was quiet, but in the silence, it carried. She ripped the veil from her head with shaking hands. Tiff, wait. Thomas reached for her. Don't touch me, she screamed. The polished society princess was gone. This was raw emotion. You're a liar. Your mother is a monster. And I am not playing stepmother to triplets on my wedding day. She gathered her massive skirt in both hands and ran back down the aisle, sobbing. Her father and mother chased after her, casting hateful glares at the Ambrose family. Senator Hartwell stopped at the end of the aisle and turned back. You'll be hearing from my lawyers, he said coldly. Then he was gone. The guests sat frozen, unsure if they should leave or stay. Then phones came out. All of them. Dozens of phones, recording everything. Someone in the back row was live-streaming. Within minutes, #Ambrose Wedding Disaster was trending on social media. Thomas stood alone at the altar, abandoned by his bride, exposed by his past, surrounded by 300 witnesses to his humiliation. Slowly, he turned and looked at Rachel. She stood there, composed and elegant, one hand resting protectively on Dean's shoulder. Well, Rachel said, checking her diamond watch. That was shorter than I expected. She looked down at the boys. Say goodbye to your father, boys. Time to go. Bye, Daddy. Ryan waved cheerfully, cracker crumbs on his face. Rachel turned on her heel, the midnight blue train swirling behind her like a cape, and began walking back down the aisle toward the exit. The crowd parted again, but this time with something like awe. She'd walked in like a queen. She was leaving like a conqueror. But the drama wasn't over. As she reached the halfway point of the aisle, Thomas's voice rang out. Desperate, broken, raw. Wait. Rachel, please don't take them. He jumped off the altar and ran after her, his perfect tuxedo jacket flapping, his composure completely gone. Rachel stopped. She didn't turn around immediately. She signaled to Margaret, who was waiting near the Audis with the drivers. "Take the boys to the car," Rachel said quietly. "Put on Bluey. I'll be there in a moment." "Are you sure?" Margaret whispered. "Yes." As Margaret led the boys away, all three waving goodbye to the sad man, Rachel turned to face Thomas. He skidded to a halt on the gravel pathway, out of breath, hair wild, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool autumn air. "Rachel," he gasped. They're really mine?" "They're mine, Thomas," Rachel said coldly. "I grew them. I birthed them. I've fed them, bathed them, sat up with them through every fever and nightmare for 4 years. You were just the donor." "I would have been there," Thomas said, tears streaming down his face now. "If I'd known, if you'd just told me. If I told you, your mother would have forced a paternity test before they were even born," Rachel said. "She would have dragged me through court while I was pregnant. The stress might have cost me my children. I wasn't going to risk their lives for your ego." Natalia appeared behind Thomas, flanked by 2 security guards, but she wasn't shouting anymore. She was panting, her carefully applied makeup streaking, her eyes calculating even in defeat. She looked at the luxury SUVs for the first time, really looked at them. At the security detail. At Rachel's jewelry. "You hid my grandsons," Natalia said, her voice low and dangerous. "You stole the Ambrose heirs." "I protected my children from a toxic environment," Rachel corrected. "There's a difference." Natalia straightened her spine, smoothing her dress. The shark was wounded but still circling. "Well, the secret is out now," Natalia said. "You can't keep them from us. They're Ambrose's. They belong at the estate. They need to be raised with their heritage, with their family name, not wherever you're keeping them." "They live in a penthouse overlooking Central Park," Rachel said dryly. "They attend the best preschool in Manhattan. They're doing just fine." Natalia let out a dismissive laugh. "Please. I know you, Rachel. You're probably living off credit cards and whatever pittance you make at some little gallery job trying to look rich for today. But custody battles are expensive. Lawyers are expensive." She pulled a checkbook from her clutch, an actual checkbook, like it was 1985. It was a power move she'd used 1,000 times. "Let's be reasonable," Natalia said, clicking her pen. "You want security? Fine. I'll write you a check right now for $5 million. Thomas looked at his mother, shocked. "Mother, you can't just—" "Quiet, Thomas," Natalia snapped. "I'm fixing your mess." She looked back at Rachel. $5 million. Cash. In exchange, you sign full custody over to Thomas. You can have visitation rights supervised, of course. Weekends. Holidays. You can see them, but we'll raise them properly." Rachel stared at the checkbook. Then she started to laugh. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't hysterical. It was genuine, amused laughter. $5 million? Rachel asked, tilting her head. "Natalia, that's adorable." $10 million, Natalia countered, her eyes narrowing. "Don't push your luck." Rachel took a step forward, invading Natalia's personal space. The scent of her expensive perfume, Clive Christian No. 1, overpowered Natalia's champagne-soaked breath. "Natalia," Rachel whispered. "I made $10 million last Tuesday. Before lunch." Natalia froze. "What?" "My company, Miller Contemporary, just closed the rebranding deal for the Quantum Genesis tech merger. My cut was $14 million. My personal net worth is currently hovering around $40 million. And it's climbing." She reached out and gently plucked the checkbook from Natalia's stunned hands. She tapped it against Natalia's cheek, patronizingly, like disciplining a child. "I don't need your money, Natalia. I could buy this estate, burn it to the ground, and build a parking lot for my employees without checking my bank balance." She dropped the checkbook on the ground. "So keep your check. You're going to need it for the legal fees." Rachel turned to Thomas, whose jaw was practically on the gravel. "You wanted a wedding, Thomas," she said. "You got a funeral instead." She walked to the lead SUV. "Rachel!" Thomas shouted, banging on the tinted window as the car started. Rachel, please, I want to know them. I want to be their father. The car didn't stop. The convoy moved smoothly down the driveway, past the security gate, and disappeared into the tree-lined road, leaving the Ambrose family standing in the ruins of their perfect day. Behind them, guests were streaming out of the tent, getting into their cars, already texting their friends. The greatest society wedding of the season had become the greatest scandal of the decade. And Rachel Miller, the woman they'd thrown away like trash, had just proven she was worth more than all of them combined.